My English teacher always told me to start my essays with a bold claim. So here it is. I anticipate that Ubisoft will go bankrupt sometime within the next 5 years, even with Tencent's intervention. This really shouldn't be a bold claim though. In fact, one look at the news and their financials combined with the desperate marketing campaign for Shadows, followed by terrible sales numbers, tells you that it's seemingly quite likely in fact. But how did it come to this? As a child, Assassin's Creed was my favorite game series. I bought all of the collectibles and I took school off to play the new game every single year. Frankly, it breaks my heart to have to make this video in the first place. Regardless, I'm here and we're going to break down the history of Ubisoft, the rise, the fall, and the potential future. And before we get further in, I'll put a full disclaimer up. I don't attribute their downfall to wokeness or whatever the crowd says. Sure, it had its place in it, but the core of it is built by much different and more nuanced issues. If you enjoy, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Ubisoft, or Ubiquitous Software, was founded all the way back in 1986 by the five Guillemot. Guillemot? We're gonna go Guillemot. The five Guillemot brothers. Here in Canada, it was mandatory to learn French for quite a while in public school and high school, but I'm still not trying to pronounce that. As long as I know that I'm pronouncing it wrong, it's okay, right? Please forgive me. Anyways, don't let the tricky wording in the histories fool you here. These five brothers were silver spoon babies, and all of the money for their business ventures came from their parents, who were, as it turns out, quite rich. I don't have anything against rich people, of course, but I do have something against rich people who like to pretend that they built themselves from the ground up. I digress. The Guillemot brothers successfully identified what was a lucrative business opportunity at the time. At their chateau in Brittany, France, they had a whopping 6 developers working by 1988. Since its founding, they'd produced a couple of games that you've never heard of, such as Zombie. It wasn't until 1995 that they'd produced their first game that you have heard of, Rayman, which originally released on the Atari Jaguar, a console that I would personally consider to be pretty obscure by modern standards. The success of the game, however, led them to expand the business, but even before this, by 1993 they were considered the largest distributor of video games in the entirety of France by making distribution deals with companies like Electronic Arts and Microprose. If they were already this successful in their homeland, then it's fair to say that Rayman was what propelled them to a worldwide audience. It convinced them to make their initial public offering, which is corporate lingo for going public as an investable entity on the stock market. This decision helped them raise a whopping $80 million, which they used to expand the company to 4 other countries in the next 2 years. With this, and with the internet really becoming a thing in '99, Ubisoft went all in and made some massively ballsy plays that ended up paying off for them. They created Gameloft, deciding to take the internet free-to-play market by storm. This is a company that still to this day produces slot mobile games, as it's kind of what they were created to do. Say what you will about it, but Gameloft's inception multiplied Ubisoft's value by quite a bit and allowed them to make their first really big move. They bought out Red Storm Entertainment and acquired the rights to the Tom Clancy games. This led, most notably, to Rainbow Six Siege. For the unks like me out there, though, it led to much better games like Rainbow Six Vegas, Splinter Cell, and of course every Ghost Recon game before Wildlands. For all the people out there trying to manifest a new Splinter Cell game, please think twice about your decision. They later acquired the rights to Prince of Persia by buying the entertainment portion of The Learning Company. With these rights, they developed Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time in 2003. A game which, if I, as a humble essayist, may speak freely, remains as the best entry in the series and is extremely impressive technically speaking for a game released in 2003. Side note, they also released Beyond Good and Evil at basically the same time. You may know it as a game with a shockingly large following today, but back then it was basically the company's first flop. Sands of Time was a massive success. Ubisoft was determined to follow up on it as well as they could, and so they started development on a sequel as soon as possible. Things, however, lost the plot. They soon found themselves with a completely different game and a new original IP at hand. This happy accident went ahead and created what I think we can all agree is Ubi's most well-known and beloved franchise. Enter Assassin's Creed. It's a series that's so embedded in Ubisoft's DNA that you can basically see how the company is doing by looking at how Assassin's Creed is doing. It really is incredible to think that its inception was largely an accident, much like how the iconic creeper in Minecraft was allegedly an accident. The success of the first game speaks for itself. It was something new, an original take on history itself with a strict adherence to historical accuracy while telling a fictional story in that time period. This, of course, is something they focused less on as time went on. I digress. It wasn't long before Assassin's Creed games were coming out every single year. I personally ended up getting into the series about a year before the release of Revelations in 2011, and by then I was all in on it. Revelations, of course, did not disappoint. It's my personal belief that it's the most beautiful and incredibly poetic way they could have concluded the story of one of gaming's most iconic characters. I'm glad it ended this way rather than milking Ezio forever. Before I go any further, if you've watched this far, then you're surely enjoying the video, so make sure to subscribe because only 1% of you are subscribed, and I'm trying to hit 2,000 by the end of June. Now, listen. I said that you could track Ubi's success with that of Assassin's Creed, and yeah, I wasn't joking. By 2013, they'd invested $250 million back into Ubisoft Quebec for continued development of the games. They were having studios alternate development on the games to release them yearly, compared to games like Far Cry and the Tom Clancy series, which was dead for a while up until Siege. Assassin's Creed took the spotlight. Even more unthinkable though, the games that were coming out on this yearly schedule were actually good. Some of the best they've made, in fact. So when did it all start to go wrong? Well, as an Assassin's Creed fan, I would say it happened when Desmond died in Assassin's Creed 3. This was a questionable narrative decision at best that's affected the very basis of the series going forward. All of them since have lacked cohesion and are clearly clueless about their own direction. This was most definitely what killed anyone's care for the game's overarching story, at least in present day. In terms of critical reception though, Black Flag is the best Assassin's Creed ever, quite possibly. Rogue, although lesser known, was just as good as Black Flag in my humble opinion. Unity had their most advanced systems and best parkour yet, which they oh so kindly decided to throw out immediately for little reason. Syndicate followed, and I personally enjoyed this game quite a lot, but it obviously paled in comparison to Unity. Origins is a game that I personally loved, and I think it's narratively one of the strongest Assassin's Creed games, undeniably far better story-wise than Unity and Syndicate. Bayek is one of my favorite assassins. But listen, whoever was writing the games at this point clearly got fired because this is where we hit the cliff. It's also the introduction of the formula they've been following ever since, if I may say the accursed word, microtransactions. They started selling literal pay-to-win bullshit in the store of a single-player game. The answer to why this happened is obviously shareholder pressure. The Guillemets around this time owned very little of their own company, basically 12% of the shares. They were struggling with attempts at hostile takeover from a company called Vivendi. The existing shareholders were nervous, and I don't blame them. Rainbow Six Siege was 2 years out from release now, and was probably still losing them money on upkeep. I'm sure they've since recouped these costs, but fixing up a game that launched that bad was likely a difficult, albeit admirable, task. Far Cry 4 sold well, but not crazy well, and they were still a year off from Far Cry 5 being ready to ship. Frankly, the numbers were probably looking a little less than desirable, so any way to make money would be exploited. If they could add a shop into a single-player game, why not do it? I think 2016 to 2017 is when you can really tell that Ubisoft makes the hard shift from trying to make good games to trying to make profit. All the games after this follow a strict formula so bland and predictable that you know exactly what to expect when you pick them up. They try to pretend they're different every time, but it's the exact same thing. In Assassin's Creed, you have a target board of generic baddies to track down while you level up, since the games had now made the mistake of switching to an RPG formula. In Far Cry, you capture bases until you own the whole map. Ghost Recon, which was suddenly back, just followed the Far Cry formula only in third person. Rainbow Six as a franchise was dead, and they were dedicated to milking as much cash as possible out of Siege, which has changed very little fundamentally over the years besides adding new operators for people to buy. Ubisoft isn't exactly forthcoming on their sales numbers, but we can see that Far Cry 5 was probably one of their biggest successes, and Far Cry 6 less so. From here, Far Cry vanishes from the map, and basically all of the focus goes on to Assassin's Creed. They've dropped two stinkers back-to-back with Valhalla and Odyssey, two games that are incredibly content-bloated with little reason and are packed full of dumb microtransactions. They also have terrible stories, but man, that is a completely different can of worms. Mirage was a decent return to form. It's a game that I personally quite enjoyed. Unfortunately, we could see that Ubisoft had very little confidence in the follow-up. The marketing campaign for Shadows began, and after the delay to focus on a player-centric approach, it became clear that they were extremely nervous about the game's performance. They started flaming people that called them out on Twitter, and marketing the game super hard. I won't lie to you, I find the premise of Assassin's Creed Shadows to be questionable at best. Frankly, it feels like a game that was meant to be inflammatory on the internet, which was perhaps not the best approach for a company in their position to take. This was more than just a black man in Japan. To reduce the issue to that would be idiocy. It's a simple issue, really. People were getting sick of being milked by slop. The Star Wars game, which should have been the easiest slam dunk in history, was shit. Odyssey was RPG slop, and Valhalla doubled down and tripled the RPG slop problems. After seeing gameplay of Shadows, it was clear that this was just going to be the exact same thing as the last two games. Combine that with a premise that seemed designed to rage bait the game's main audience. Listen, it doesn't take a marketing genius to find out that something bad is going to happen. Ubisoft basically had the same problem as Marvel for a time there. So Shadows releases, and yeah, it's RPG slop and it plays terribly and the story sucks, and also the microtransactions are even worse this time. Ubisoft has done their best to hide the sales numbers, but we can infer based on the dropping of their shares after the last quarterly report. At this point, it was flop after flop for them. X-Defiant, Skull and Bones, and also that Avatar game that was essentially a Far Cry game in disguise. It's clear that the formula is no longer working as intended, and someone added a little too much greed and idiocy into the pot somewhere along the way. I personally think that Ubisoft's downfall started with Origins, but if they've been falling down since 2017, then after the release of Shadows, they're in freefall. The stocks tell the story too. They've since cancelled a bunch of projects. The CEO sent a letter to the staff basically telling them to do better as if it was somehow their fault. The devs haven't had creative control for a long time now. It's clear that all of the decisions are coming from the top. Microtransactions, rush orders, and yet somehow it's the fault of the devs that keep getting laid off and are striking for higher salaries against these unreasonable demands. So here we are. 3 Ubisoft studios have been shut, a shit ton of employees have been laid off, Expedition 33 has proved what Ubisoft devs can do if they're not hit with pressure from the top. There have been constant talks about a full buyout from private equity. Instead, Ubisoft created a new subsidiary and handed the IP rights for R6, Assassin's Creed, and Far Cry over to them. This allowed Chinese megacorp Tencent to only invest in what they want, the games. This is, of course, a terrible decision if you know anything at all about Tencent, but it's what they've done to keep the company afloat for now. So with Tencent now effectively owning 25% of Ubisoft's lifeblood, what happens now? They claim they want to focus on, quote, building game ecosystems designed to become truly evergreen and multi-platform, end quote. Which is essentially corpo speak for live service slop games. The moral of the story is that, like many things, if you thought it was bad, it's getting worse. Rainbow Six will get worse, Assassin's Creed won't be making a comeback anytime soon, Far Cry, oh poor Far Cry, if that next game ever comes out. So, Ubisoft's downfall, you ask? Look around, my friend. We're living in it. Keep an eye on what happens next and come back to make fun of me if I'm wrong. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, subscribe already, damn it, you watched all the way to the end. I love you all, and I'll see you soon. Ciao.